Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this virtual fireside chat with George Muir and myself. A somewhat unusual fireside chat in that, whilst we may have a fire in the background, it is all to the beauty of Hop-In and the expertise of the ICE team made possible for all of us this afternoon to have this chat between a Paddy based in London and my friend George, I call him a Scottish Swede based in Helsingborg. And George, it's great to see you again. And it's a great shame that we can't actually have a dinner or a beer over a table to enjoy many's the night we've had over the last few years since first we met. So I think, George, our task is to try and bring some fresh perspective to what has been a remarkable day to set up the final plenary session with Steve Cook, who wants to talk about the future. And no better man to set the scene than you, George, in terms of the career you've had. So let's talk a bit about that. Tell me about your background and the journey you've taken from Bonnie, Scotland to the delights of Sweden, and all about you and transformation in the future.
Thanks, Chris, and it's lovely to be here. I put the fire on this morning, so this is the fire in my living room. It's not a YouTube trip; it's a real fire. That's my family pictures behind me. So about myself, really, young Scot, left university when I was 20, worked in the UK, but really wanted to get out of the UK after a long time. And I actually got an opportunity to move to work for a small company called Ikea, the furniture company. And my first role was actually just to help Ikea move into East, as it's called that time, East Europe, as a chief operation officer. And that was both technical and people at that point in time, but we didn't call that back then. That was almost 30 years ago. And really my job was to try to negotiate retail into these countries, and transforming from really black and red, as the countries were, into a full colourful site. Then I moved up to, in 1994, to digitalise or digital transformation of Ikea's design company, which was, 94 was when I really started with transformation, creating Ikea's first web page, home site as it's called, and really building up the full technical landscape for Ikea. And I was always given the chance to do 7 years ahead. Then, unfortunately, I had an accident and I almost died. So I changed life and went back to Ikea and moved from the technology side to the people side. And my first real chance then was to build up something called Digital Workplace. Again, that was before anybody even thought about it, 13, 14 years ago. And what I actually based it on was the real values, the people values that Ikea had. I mean, I was lucky to meet the sixth employee of Ikea on my first week and had that full brainwashing indoctrination from him. And he told me that the two important things in Ikea to live with was first to network and then to share your knowledge. And that was the first thing I actually did as a digital way of working. So it wasn't really about the technique. It was actually about introducing a new way of working, which led me to the job of designing the future Ikea workplace. And basically, the workplace, we changed things really completely from, we didn't call them offices, we called them meeting places, and we talked about how were we going to work and where we want to work. And it was a really uphill struggle towards the end, because we were really questioning the big blue and yellow boxes, because it went from workplace to how we work and what is the future of work and everything else. And sometimes a big company like Ikea gets a little bit scared of everything that we want to change.
Yeah, and working within a big organization like that, and meeting some of the original folk who made Ikea the organization it is today, I can see how daunting it would be, because I'm sure that there's been a lot of cultural adjustment, and I guess you've had many years now to practice all of that. But I would say, you've moved from digital into people, and in recent years you're getting more involved with the place side of things. So what's life like for you since leaving Ikea, George? What have you been up to?
Well, since I left Ikea, I started off working with if you want to call it a unicorn company or a wannabe unicorn, which was based in Australia, but its headquarters was in New York. And what it's really amazing, from working with a company that was fully structured and being a part of building governance to a startup company of, when I started there was 50, by the time I left there it was almost 250, and I think they're even bigger now. Trying to bring in governance and understanding what that means. I mean, because a startup is basically chasing a shiny ball. And so the business plan can change. If there is a business plan, it can change overnight. And really it's about venture capitalists getting in, helping with getting some money, and at the same time, basically trying to move and move and move. So what's really interesting, a lot of the times when I was working with these big companies, is that they want to have a startup philosophy, which is basically be able to be dynamic and move. But they don't want to give the startup autonomy and the startup authority, because there is no, basically everybody in a startup wins and loses, stands or falls because of the actions they make. And in a corporate society, it's really much about, this is my role, this is my box, and this is what I have to do. So that was a learning part. So now I have both sides. Basically, I've got the organization and the structure and the governance from a huge corporation to what happens to get small companies going. And then now I'm meeting, basically what I'm doing now is advising and helping and describing how do we move forward, both from a long-term perspective, but also in a short-term perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting, I think, debate in terms of how do we move forward? Do we move forward on using, shall we say, 20th century mindsets, or do we have to adjust our view of life completely? Because a lot of people on this discussion today and attending ICE will be from the sales generation and the technology side, and how do you there's been huge change there, but say in my old world of real estate, it's been a challenge. And I remember, I guess, starting when we started at Disney and meeting one or two of Walt's original team who were meant to have retired but didn't, and they talked about if you can dream, you can do it. And I think that's what's required now, is a completely fresh dose of innovation and fresh thinking. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think so. The answer is yes, but really what we need to think about is, what is the company's values? What is the company based on? And what does the company want to achieve? And then drive those values. The challenge I felt an awful lot of the time was, especially with the bigger corporations, is the fact that we have these core values, but when it comes to actually working, the core values goes out the window, and it's really about the bean counters and the cost cutters and everything else. Bean counters is, I mean, my biggest fight was with CFOs, which was great because we would actually talk about why we're doing it against the total picture. But a bean counter is really something else. It's really about keeping it sharp, 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 and then cost. And I think the challenge is that we get to making small steps. And one of the biggest things I learned was ride the big waves. Really ride the big waves. Don't go for the small waves. And that meant that when you start something off, look at the whole thing. Don't just look at the tiny little part. Look at the whole perspective. Get a fresh perspective into this and show what it means. And then say, well, to be able to get there, we need to do this, then this, then this. Nothing cast in stone, but you actually create a journey, how to get there. And through that journey, you can then review and review and review. But when you put bean counters to run projects, you'll never get there.
Okay, and that sort of looks at the what bit. So let's just move on for a little bit and talk about how, and how do we sort of navigate through all these different agendas, whatever, and around. Let's talk about this conference is premised upon alliance building, and Mike, who spoke at the keynote earlier, who's probably been the father of alliance networks in this country. He talked about this shift from a transactional to a transformational way of thinking about contracts. And what's your take on that? And how can we work better together? And is there a smarter way, as opposed to, say, what, to use your words, the bean counter approach?
Well, So I've been banging the drum over the last few years about fragmentation of work. And what that really means, networking. It really means about networking and people moving from, if you want to call it a gig society, more to a transformational or a transaction, and not really transactional, but really, I've got this competence. And so I think the challenge really now is to work out, and as we move forward, how do you want to actually run your business? Do you want to run your business only for profit? Or do you want to run your business for happiness? Do you want to run your business for getting things done? And if you see some of the companies are succeeding, are changing why they want to run their business, because they're looking at how is the product going to be used as opposed to how is the business making the product. So you have to look at things basically for me at both ends. But the challenge now, I think, will be, we had this huge, the last 20 years, the people discussion about the war on talent. And companies have been designed around the war on talent. I think that will change. I think there will not be a war on talent. There'll be a more islands of capabilities and people working in smaller islands, especially after COVID-19, to say, I want to be able to do this. I don't want to be able to be a part of a big corporation. And then people will then have to find their way through. So as one of the people were talking about HR, which I hate the term HR, but what happens to the HR departments today will then turn into network finders and find the right competence to work and to give the right value as opposed to the right price. And we need to talk about value in the full sense of the word value.
Okay, and you mentioned COVID. So given the technology flavor of today's event, technology has undoubtedly had a big impact on how we work today, but expand a little bit more about these what you call it, these islands of capability and the impact of COVID on what was a fast moving technology race anyway.
So the first part, I think, with the technology is we've got lots of technology, but we don't know how to use it. And actually, we don't know how to behave on it. It's more appropriate. So there's a level of learning that we need to put into play about, people can use Zoom calls, yes, because it's a click and it's going. But if you don't show your video, if you're sitting and slurping and picking your nose while you're on a video call, you're not being humanistic. That's one layer. The second layer is around about the leadership on these calls and the leadership in this new world. It's not a management, and I've never really believed in that management. That's me. It's really about leaders, and there'll be a different style of leaders about helping and encouraging and moving on. So when you then get into the point of what's happened with COVID, one of the main outcomes of COVID, people are saying, well, I don't want to work the way I used to work. I don't want to spend 3 hours on the train. I don't want to do this. I want to be able to have a little bit more of this. I still want to be able to meet and work with people. So what will then happen is I think you'll get more and more companies supporting breakaways. I had a transformational discussion with one of the big banks talking about how they will change and how their actual organization will change. And things in the bank will start to break off because they don't need that type of capability just in the bank. So they'll think the COVID is showing to the, if you want to call it today's C-suite, that you can fragment our business, and then people will then start to work together and collect together in smaller groups.
Interesting, very interesting. So does 1 and 1 equal 13 then, George?
1 and 1 equals 13 if you've got the right mindset.
And what does the right mindset look like?
So really it's having an open mindset. A lot of people get 1 and 1 equals nothing. And I won't go into the bean counter discussion again, but an awful lot of things has got to do with, can we do it, can we do it, can we do it? 99% of projects don't deliver on time because they're managed the wrong way. 1 and 1 is 13. It's when you don't build on people's CVs. You build on their knowledge, you build on their capabilities, you build on your applicability to do things. So when you start to work that way, when you come up with an idea and then somebody bounces that idea or something else and bounces it and bounces it, all of a sudden you really get from a one idea to a really, really big idea. So 1 and 1 does equal 13, and that means you're making progress, you're driving things through, you're succeeding, you're happy, and you're growing and growing and growing.
But if I were a typical middle manager, I don't think I'd be very comfortable with you working in my team, George.
Yeah. And well, the thing, the challenge here is it's not criticism, but middle management really have to look at themselves in the mirror and find out, okay, what's my role?
Yeah.
Do I really need to manage, or do I need to lead? And I think that's the question that you have to look at. As a leader, you can lead in different ways. You can lead yourself, you can lead others, you can lead leaders, and you can lead from the front, but you can also lead from the back. So managers need to start to transform, I truly believe, into proper leaders and help people generate these ideas, help people grow, not just giving them a pay rise or giving a development talk or whatever. Everybody is a leader. And so you have to build those things out. And then you'll get natural leaders who are natural in leading a certain subject and not get closed down. And we have to have an atmosphere of openness. So if somebody has an idea, you don't turn around. What happens in a lot of meetings, you hear people coming around and saying, that's stupid. There's nothing stupid. You have to listen. You may have to then reflect. And one of the things I've learned over my last 10 years is reflection is the most useful tool you can have. The more you reflect, the more more happiness you gain from the discussion, the coalition that you're working with.
Yeah, and I mean, it's that phrase, the beloved of leadership and business books, time to think. And you look at the world today, and you've got all of these challenges. You have a different environment, shall we say, because of COVID. People have had time to reflect and ask themselves, why do I go to the office to send emails and all these other little phrases? But the other thing for me that I don't know whether people have reflected on enough is the fact that we now, I think, seen a rapid acceleration of the arrival of AI and robots and chatbots, by necessity, in terms of, any helpline you go on to now, you will invariably get some form of chatbot or some form of artificial intelligence to check out the basics rather than a human. And you hear a lot of people, particularly when they're calling up airlines to get refunds, as I've had the joy of, British Airways, Ryanair, and Aer Lingus in recent weeks. When can I speak to a human being? And I suppose that's a negative take on it. But the reality is, this technology is here to stay, and I think, and it's going to become more and more ubiquitous. And there is a fear factor. And I'm just wondering, given your career, should we be afraid of all of this stuff?
I don't know if I should say afraid is the right word. As you know, I talk about in a lot of my keynotes about ethical AI. And I think the challenge is that we as humans have to understand the position of artificial intelligence and technology in our lives. And when and where do we use it and where we don't use it. So really, it's about making AI humanistic. We have got AI everywhere. And again, if you want to use AI for saving costs, then that's fun, and that could happen. But basically, you might actually lose value from your company because you're not using it appropriate. So again, when you get down to this business process or way of working, where do you want to use AI? What AI is great for is actually making predictions, collecting information, identifying patterns, and doing everything else. I talk about biases and everything else, and sometimes I actually ask the question, maybe we should use AI to check our bias rather than the other way around. But the AI is going to be here, and it's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger as it learns and learns and learns. But do I want to let AI hire me or fire me? Really, no. It might come up with information to a person to do things. But then I think it's really down to humans to make a judgment on where we should use it. Ultimately, from a business perspective, AI will do an awful lot of the work for us, the repetitive work for us. But there's stuff that's got logic and sense and everything else. That's really, really, really important that we take that. So we should take the judgment calls and we should take the action calls. And we need to understand that if we don't use AI, then your business will probably disappear. A lot of businesses, so not every business, but a lot of business will disappear. So should we be scared? We should be scared if we don't recognize the fact that AI is on its way in. We should be scared if we don't recognize that AI will take an awful lot of our work, and it will replace some of our jobs as well. But we should not be scared of using AI if we use it appropriately. And we need to really, really sit down again, look at a fresh perspective and think, when can we use this? What can we use it for? And we need to make sure that then the big companies who are developing the AI actually also have an ethical approach. And that's what I've been doing as well, talking to the Microsofts, talking to the Googles, talking to these guys, explaining and discussing about an open AI. And I mean, I tried a number of years ago going to the UN talking about an ethical API. The idea was good, but the legal perspective was just crazy. But we need to think about that. There will not be one ethical AI. We need to think about what is ethical, where do we use it, how do we use it, and that's us. We have to be humans and we have to stand up for it.
Sure. I think, if we went into ethics, George, we'd need another bottle at the very least. But let's, as we're a couple of minutes left, let's just round off this fireside alcohol-free conversation. If you look at all the stuff that, the huge impact of technology, probably bigger than any other bit of, technology sort of that's arrived over the last 20 years. What do you think that means for, say, for the future of the office? Like I was talking to a HR expert a little while back, Andy, but let's see what perspectives you have on this. Like, what do you think offices, is there a future for offices?
I think there is a future for meeting places, to be able to meet people and to discuss things, collaboration places. There is a need to be able to work together. But in our generation, so anybody who's, let's say, above 30, we have been brought up, and maybe even—
You're being generous again, George.
Yeah, to you and to me. But our generations, the people who are working just now, are still in the mode that we need to meet and they do a handshake. My son, who's 13, he will leave school in a digital world. He will not know and will not really want to work in a physical world. And in fact, his salary or monies will be in tokens, Facebook tokens or Frontier tokens or whatever type of tokens. So the question is that we need to be able to change. We need to be able to design the places that we work and meet in a new way. They have to be flexible. I think there's too much money involved in office buildings today for them to disappear. But I think how they will be used will completely change. I think a lot of communities have a huge opportunity right now to start to develop community centres and community workplaces, like a Flexwork, WeWorkplace. But we need to find something local, and I think we need to start thinking about communities as opposed to companies. We need to, and again, here in Sweden, it's really much about a community spirit. So we've already got some of those things in place, not all over the place, but we're really thinking about that. And it's like, just a simple thing today on the newspaper that said that only a third of the people in Sweden actually have money in their pocket, physical money. I don't have any money in my pocket. So what I think the thing with the office is that the office needs to transform into meeting places, into workplaces, or headquarters, or whatever. But I don't think that we will have the same amount of people who go to the office next year as we did 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because I get asked a lot about this, and what will happen to real estate investments, and our pensions are tied up with all of this, and they are to an extent, but not to as much as you might imagine. In that, I find that pension companies have been reducing their so-called exposure to commercial real estate considerably over the last 10 years. Maybe they saw something coming there, but we have a lot of these big buildings in every city in the world that need to be put to some use if they're not going to be used for traditional offices. And that's where I think we need to get a smarter approach to using these, which not just for one company but for many companies, or maybe some of them might be changed into housing, or for some other maybe community purposes. But are you seeing anything like that, or what's the debate like in Sweden on this, or has it even come into sort of the general sort of discourse?
Everything is kind of slowed down because of COVID, as you know. But the debate before COVID was really much about creating this community type way of working. And so, if you want to take the WeWork type example of model and pushing that really out into the community. So you have these flex offices, flex working, shopping, and everything else wrapped around each other. I mean, the Swedish setup is basically each big town, each big city has one main manufacturer connected to it. It's not like it's like 55 companies in one small village. So it's basically built up of a network anyway. But they're trying, in the Swedish way, is starting to move that together. In my talks in Germany, it was exactly the same discussion about becoming more community and less city bound. And the word city comes in as a big discussion as well. They want to get more into this more townships and areas like that. So I think the challenge is that will office be known in 2030? Will it be the same as an 8-track tape? We heard about it, but we don't know about it, what it really is. I have a feeling that the word office will transform into something else. The buildings will be there, they will be used, they'll be transformed, because there's buildings from 200 years ago which have been used. But the older buildings have become houses or apartments. Will that happen to the new ones? At this point in time, I don't know. But there is a change. There is definitely a change. And I think if you wanted to be one of these bean counters, I would say that only a third of the people who work in an office in 2019 will actually work in an office in 2022.
Well, George, I think that's an interesting place maybe to draw stumps in this conversation. Although knowing you and knowing our past chats, it could go on for much longer. I think this is all about riding the big waves. I don't think we have any real option but to accept the reality of change, and only by looking right across the spectrum, by building fresh perspectives, by building better alliances with as diverse a group of people and partners as possible, can we make a better fist of doing stuff. George, you be safe, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Signing off now. Thank you.
Guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I on? Hi. Wow. As a founder member of the Institute of Place Management and other involvements with place, including teaching destination marketing at uni, I would say that I could really get stuck into those conversations for a lot longer. This is just about it, guys. We're